Thank you for listening to the Content Magazine podcast, Conversations with Silicon Valley's Creatives. I'm Daniel Garcia, your host and the cultivator of Content Magazine, published by SV Creates. Hello, welcome to the Content Magazine podcast. I'm Daniel Garcia, the cultivator of Content Magazine, and we are here today in our sofa studio with poets and Poet Laureate
Emeritus. Yeah, I had to learn that too.
Tshaka Campbell. So I'm super excited to have you here. We've been talking about doing a podcast for quite a while.
Absolutely.
We had you in an issue back in like 2000. It was right before COVID.
Yeah.
I remember because we did the pick a party at Mini Boss, and then COVID hit right after.
Yeah.
And actually, I don't know if I ever told you this. I felt bad. You were there. I hadn't met you before.
Right.
And you were there, and I was like talking around, and then I saw you, and I was going to come over and talk to you, and then I didn't.
Yeah.
It's
all good.
You were gone.
I was stalking you anyway, so I know who you are. So.
But now, I mean, when we see each other too often, probably.
Yeah. No, not at all. I remember when I first moved to San Jose, and getting seeing an issue of the Content magazine, and I love Architectural Digest.
Oh yeah.
And it put me in the mind of that, and
cool.
so I've sort of been following. Like when I just got here. So I've been following what you guys have been doing for a while. So
cool. Well, thank you. So let's do, like when you came to San Jose, I want to start there because where did you actually grow up? Because you have a very interesting accent.
Yeah. It's funny when people tell me, you're from so-and-so. And I'm like, no. They're like, no, that's not it. I'm like, but I tell them. They're like, no, that's not it.
What do most people kind of try to guess?
They don't. They tell me. It's funny because I'm originally born in London, England, right? Okay. And then I came here in, I don't remember because then you'll know how old I am. But I came here and I was in my early, probably like 10, 11, maybe 12 or so. But for the most part, grew up in Brooklyn, in New York, right? So that's like when I talk about sort of who's Tshaka become, it's shaped from Brooklyn and New York City.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I grew up, and then during the time I've lived all over the place, and for mostly in again New York, and then moved to San Francisco for a little bit. Then came to, and that was for work. Then came to LA. Then met my wife, and she was in England at the time, so we're doing a long distance thing.
Oh, wow.
And then I moved to England because LA is a different country than the United States, and I was like, we can't bring you over here. It's too much of a shock. But since I was already I was a citizen and everything, I could just move there and work and everything. Yeah. So I moved there, and then was there for a little bit. Had my little one, and then I had an opportunity in Silicon Valley, and that's what brought me back.
Okay.
Well, brought me to San Jose in say 2014 or so.
Yeah. Okay. So the tech kind of, but you do marketing.
Marketing all in all industries, but in the last couple of years, it's been around tech, ed tech, and SaaS and all that good Silicon Valley stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So talk about that upbringing for you as like coming over when you were about 10 or whatever. I mean, that's pretty, you can remember being a boy in England and then coming to Brooklyn. What was that like for you on like a personal kind of like social developmental?
Yeah. It's, look, I think in certain situations we're so blessed because back then you didn't have the social media. You didn't have all of this stuff to either excite you or scare you or whatever the case may be. The most I had was like TV shows that we watched. Sure. And, it was, my mom didn't come out the house for about a couple of weeks because all she saw was like, and again, aging myself, she saw like Kojak and stuff like that,
sure.
and Starsky and Hutch.
It's like
she's
crime
like,
everywhere.
I'm not coming out, right?
Yeah.
But I came and I was super excited to be here. I remember coming off of the plane and seeing the streets and the streets being so wide and open, and I was like, oh, they rolled out the red carpet for me. They're welcoming me. It was just this feeling I got. So the transition for me was pretty easy because I was so thirsty for it. I was so open for what the United States can bring to me. And my dad had been here for a while, and we came my mom and I came after my dad left.
Did your dad come over for work, or was that kind of
Yeah,
like the thing?
yeah. He had come over for work. He was doing some some political stuff in London, and sort of, I guess you equate it to maybe the sort of the Black Panthers and such.
Okay.
From a London perspective.
Oh, okay. All
yeah,
right.
things have gotten sticky. So
Okay, so then he kind of flee to
Yeah,
there was
kind-
like
yeah.
persecution or
yeah, that kind of stuff.
Oh,
where
okay.
It was like
All right, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was doing programs and stuff that were beneficial, nothing illegal or anything
Right.
like that, but just very beneficial. But then, at that time,
okay.
it's easy to spotlight someone and make life difficult for them.
So your father then was a bit of an activist then.
Yeah.
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 Okay, I didn't know that about you.
Yeah,
actually.
not
That's
a lot
good.
of people know. This is
Yeah.
new news.
Yeah, that's good.
New news
So then,
content.
because your dad read poetry to you, or was influential in you.
He was influential in me, but not in the sense of poetry. My dad, he was like an orator.
Okay.
Orator, yeah. He loved language.
Yeah.
And so that's where I got the love for language, like the texture of language and how language can move things and turn just the words itself.
Yeah.
And so I grew up with a love for that. But of course, like any kid does, he just ignores, like, man, that's dad, whatever.
Yeah, totally.
And it wasn't until I got much older that I realized that that's where that love came from. But it wasn't so much poetry as much as, he'll just randomly read a Malcolm X excerpt or William or Churchill.
Yeah.
Because Churchill was, oh my God, he was a master of language and how to use it.
Yeah.
So I grew up with that, and it wasn't until I got much older that it was just like, oh wait,
Yeah.
like I like this. This is
So those influences are there, but
they were dormant. Like I had
Yeah.
no interest in poetry.
really.
No interest in poetry. I drew. I liked music because I came up in Brooklyn. When I was coming up is like right when hip hop was starting. The break dancing, the 7 elements of hip hop. So I was immersed in that. So
Yeah.
I loved the creativity that built around me through that.
Yeah.
But poetry wasn't really a thing outside of rap music and,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
making that association.
Okay.
It wasn't until much older.
So then when you were younger, then did you already, like, at what age then did you start kind of doing rap or spoken word, or because I think when I read in your article before, like you were writing privately, I think, on your own, like
So-
mom's making me do chores, I can't believe it.
Yeah. And it's it was more rap than it was anything else. And
Yeah.
not rap. I mean, I would never call myself a hip hop artist or a rapper. It wasn't that at all. But it was like rhyming scheme and rhythmic, and I loved music, all kinds of music. So that was always in my upbringing. But like poetry really didn't hit me until, like, I'm talking late 20s.
Okay.
Early
All right.
30s,
Okay.
and this is after moving to, this is after coming back from, where was I? So, yeah, going to school, coming back to New York, and this was, maybe the 2000, early
Okay.
2000s,
Yeah.
and coming into there's a place it's a landmark place for poetry called the Nuyorican Poetry, Poetry Cafe. In this is where Miguel Algarin and so many of sort of the what's equivalent to, I guess, beat poets over here in
Okay.
San Francisco
Yeah.
was in the last poets,
Yeah.
that kind of era, built up this house of Nuyorican. And I remember walking in there one day late, and there were 400 people in a room, and you could hear a pin drop.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, oh my God,
They
this is,
respected
I
art.
was like, this is crazy.
Yeah.
And that's when it was, really like, okay, let me dive into this thing. I'd been,
Yeah.
and to your point before, I've been writing, but writing at home, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Writing for myself. I wouldn't call it journaling because it was still kind of poetry
Yeah.
related, but it was, I didn't know this world existed outside. I thought it was just, okay, you're writing your book and maybe I'll do
Yeah.
something with this later on.
Was that writing, do you think? Obviously, did you feel, what were you feeling inside that drew, like I was a young kid and I had but I would never write.
Yeah.
So how do you think that came out? Like, what was the need, the impetus for you to actually journal it or to put it down on paper?
I think it was, and I don't think, I know it is because it's what I still write about today. It's about identity.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just learning today what to name it, what to call it.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm still trying to figure that out, but it is a lot about identity. But I grew up in a household, like I said, where my dad was always talking about the Black experience, the African American experience, history, going back to, Africa, and really, and I don't want to classify the history because it's just history, right? But pulling out the parts that haven't been really taught. And so this is the household that I grew up in.
Yeah.
So naturally, when I started writing, what came naturally was sort of the background of what he was always talking about, but then also growing up in Brooklyn, growing up on the streets, growing up in the hood, and as opposed to it being, this is what happened to me this day in the hood when someone tried to rob me. Yeah. I always thought of it as like, what started this in the first place? Like, why is this happening? And
more of kind of like the societal.
Yeah. So even when I started writing poetry, that was sort of where I started to angle toward.
Yeah.
And get into that. And then there was there were so many, like, I call it like creation story. So there was all that going on, and I was writing. But I guess if I go back to the real sort of start of it, the ready, set, go. There was a group of folks in Brooklyn, good friends of mine, and I guess we were in our 20s or 30s, thinking like, oh, we know life. So on Fridays we would get,
out.
What I mean? So on Fridays we would get together, drink wine, smoke cigars, right? Like we knew what we were doing. But it was a great gathering for us to come together Fridays. And so I love this story because one of the folks that used to host it bought this book called Black Erotic Poetry, right? Chocolate poetry, something like that, and was reading it, right? And we were like, oh, we can write better than that. You know what I mean? It's or we can do that. So the task for next week the cigars and wine was, hey, everyone write a poem.
Yeah.
So we came back and we wrote a poem, and then we shared it with each other. We did it the next week. It was 540 Carlton Avenue in Brooklyn, and we started calling it Isms at 540.
That's cool.
And we would come in there and write, and then it kind of fizzled out, but I continued, and I was like, oh, I really like this.
So it was like you had your own kind of like little workshop in a way, right?
Yeah. We were just fooling around, you know what I mean?
That's
and then I was like, you know what, let me do this. And I started writing, and then there was a person that lived in my building. They used to go to a place called Brooklyn Moon, which was another, staple for poetry. Saul Williams, Talami C, those folks used to be in there, definitely saw on a regular basis. And I started going there. He told me about this, and that's when I kind of knew, wait, there's this bigger thing to this poetry. And so it was like a combination of that, plus all the stuff that was built up with my dad, then going to the New Eurekan that night, and then certain places in Jersey that I was like, okay, this is something I want to hold on to, and I want to figure out how I can nurture this, and make it my own. So that was, But that happened late in life, really.
That's cool. So did your dad actually then do kind of like speeches and stuff like that and rally calls or something like that? So you saw him kind of using words in that way to motivate people?
Not that I remember.
Okay.
I have many stories of him talking about us coming back from events.
Okay.
And me sort of, because this is when I was young, I'm 6, 7.
Yeah, that's right, because this was back in England. When he came to the United States, did he still participate?
No, that he became a city worker. So that's all that was like kind of left behind. And I think, funny enough, probably that's why we got so much of it at home. Right, because
he didn't have an outlet.
Right, and so remember folks picking me up from school would be like, "No, we'll meet you down the block. We're not coming to your house because your dad's going to keep us in there."
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, how is that? I mean, how do you think he dealt with that? I mean, like if you're like kind of like a revolutionary and an activist and a mover and a shaker and an advocate, and then you move and that's kind of like been silenced. Yeah, I mean, how was he?
It was frustrating.
Yeah.
Again, I can look back at it now. Back then, it was just like my dad's ornery,
Yeah,
but
totally, yeah.
I look back at it now, and even in the work that I'm doing, it's really coming to terms with, I can imagine how frustrated he was at the time.
Yeah.
And then you're coming to a completely different environment with a different set of people with a different psychology. You know what I mean?
Different society and cultural norms and everything.
Yeah. So you're looking at situations like, with all of the resources, how is this still happening? You know, and not really having a platform to do that. And again, it's a different space here. There are folks that, I think if you want to get out into the forefront of this type of a conversation, you also have to worry about, like, what does this mean for your family?
Yeah.
It's not an easy road.
Yeah.
And so, I think
there's a sacrifice
absolutely
for change, right?
Yeah, indeed. And so I think he had all of that to contend with. So I think it was a lot of frustration on his part, but again, that's why we heard so much of it in the household and in conversations, and it just kind of sits there and dissolves into the DNA at some point.
Yeah. So then you got your Tshaka wine group, and you guys doing stuff. You started to go to these different places. Your earlier stuff was much more, like a lot more with music and beats, like a kind of rap-ish type.
It kind of,
stuff.
That was spoken word at the time. Because you'll. And I hate this definition, but you'll have like page poetry. We would call it page poetry versus spoken word.
Yeah.
And near the two will meet. But I think it's for me, it's all poetry, and then there's subsets of it.
Yeah.
But back then, when I was coming up, poetry or spoken word was very rhythmic.
Yeah.
And it was.
It was like battle rap too type stuff.
I think battle rap came later.
Okay.
You know what I mean? I mean, the poetry, it was still very much sage and hibiscus. It was still very peace. For the most
Clove
part.
Cigarettes.
You know what I mean? Right.
Marijuana.
It wasn't like, it still wasn't the click thing anymore. That had passed. So I think it was peaceful. You had certain areas, but it wasn't so much a battle rap as we know it today. You had slam competition, which I guess you could look at that as a sort of a battle thing, but it wasn't at the person.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah.
But spoken word, at least in New York City and on the East Coast, in that realm, it was more rhythmic. It was more. There was a rhythm and a rhyme to it. Yeah. Some of that still exists today, but I think, in my personal view, there's starting to be a little bit of a departure from that. But I know definitely in my work, it's been a departure as I've grown.
Yeah, a little bit more free form, or not so much to the typical meters and stuff like that. Being a little bit free form, using the language in a different way. Right?
Yeah. I think everything evolves. I mean, if you think of even in hip hop and rap music, going from your KRS-One, your Rakim, to what Kendrick is doing now, to what Andre was doing, Andre 3000 was doing back then with words and language and meter and all of that. Yeah. So I think it all evolves, you know. But at that time it was very rhythmic, and what the crowd, at that point you kind of, maybe that's it, when you start earlier, it's sort of like, hey, what is the crowd like, you know what I mean? And you're playing to that, and then as you become more confident with your own work, it becomes sort of, no, what is it that I want to say?
Yeah, what would you say, like, even in that point? I mean, like, so if you think of, like, your early work to what you're doing now, and you even talked about how now you can kind of give words and definitions to what you're doing that you had always been kind of doing.
Right.
What do you see has changed, maybe even in your approach to writing a piece, or to putting together a piece, from young Tshaka to now Sage?
Sage Tshaka.
Guru.
Right. I think there's a couple things. There's some really, really practical things.
Okay.
One of which is, when I was younger, it was sort of like, today is poetry day. I'm going to go to the cafe and sit down and write and look at my environment and blah, blah, blah. You get older, you got kids and jobs. You're writing in between stuff,
Yeah.
I remember writing on the train, or reading into my phone, saying stuff into my phone. And so just the practical approach to writing has changed over time. Okay. I don't have this space anymore. I've tried to, create that, but so that's changed the work. And as such, it's kind of like looking at things. I'm attacking a topic from multiple angles at different times. So you can imagine if I sit down, yes, there's editing, but if I sit down and write a poem and I'm sitting there for a couple of hours, I'm going to edit it later, of course, but I feel like the meat of that comes in that moment, and then I'm shaping it.
Right.
Whereas now it's sort of like, here's a thought, and then later it's another thought, and then another thought. But all of those separate thoughts are influenced by something else that happened.
Right.
Right. And so I feel like it's much more, it's fed differently. The poetry's fed differently now, and that's just from a practical perspective. Yeah. The other piece is just life in general, right?
Yeah.
You different
marriage.
Yeah. You see things from a different angle. Like now having a daughter, there's so many points of view that I don't know have changed, but they've definitely altered. I definitely see. Remember, there was a point that I was looking at my work, and so much of it was about her or she. And then realizing, wow, so much of it is in the context of what she's walking into,
right?
From a life perspective. And I didn't even, that wasn't
conscious.
Yeah, that wasn't conscious. It was just happening. You know what I mean?
Kind of like to leave her, to prepare her. To leave her with,
you start looking at things. Yeah. You start looking at things differently.
You have a piece, letters
to my daughter is so that luckily it was going to be the book Letters to My Daughter that I've changed the name now, that got picked up by El Martillo Press. Cool. Is I turned it to Blood at the Root.
Okay.
And even that's a process, right? That was a process because the way I wanted that book to come out was not, it was letters to my daughter, but it wasn't letters to her. It wasn't like, oh, in life, do this. When this happens, do this. It was more, let me talk to you about your granddad. Let me talk to you about experiences I've had. Let me talk to, there's things in that book that she's not going to understand yet. There's things that I don't know how to talk to her about yet. Also things that I'm still giving myself permission to talk to her about, What
do you mean by that?
I'm like, I'm always careful or conscious when I write a poem that has to do with women or the state of women.
Sure.
Even though it is my view.
Right.
But, giving myself permission to have that view of a particular thing. Yeah. By way of how I want to talk to her about it.
Right.
So it's giving myself permission to say, you can have this conversation with her about this thing, about loss. Yeah. About like one day you're going to have a boyfriend and he's going to walk out the door.
Right.
Like, what does that mean?
Broken hearts. And
right.
all that kind of...
and giving myself permission to be able to have that conversation from a male perspective. Right. And as a dad's perspective. Yeah. Right. Because at the heart of that book, it's taken me, I've been trying to write this book for she's 14 now, probably over 12 years. Wow. Yeah. But I always stop because I'm just like, no one else wants to know this story. Like, why would anyone else want to listen? This is my thing to her. Why would I put this in a book? Is that actually being facetious? Writing this book to my daughter and then publishing it? Like, you know what I mean? So there was so many things that I had to fight with to give myself permission to, hey, put this in a book, because it's not, on one level, it's not just for her. Right.
But don't you know, you've experienced this. I think I even saw you with your poetry. It's like, the more personal that you get, right, you end up finding out that it's more universal.
Absolutely.
There's more people. So you were writing ideas and thoughts and memories for your daughter, or inspired by your daughter's existence, right? Then that also resonates with so many other people, right?
Yeah. It's a fight. If you're not I keep using the word facetious, but that's not the right word. But you're always questioning. You're always imposter. That's the word I'm looking for. Yeah, the imposter syndrome, right? Okay. And so you're always kind of like, is this good enough, or will people listen?
Are you? But okay, you've been doing this for a while, and you were the Poet Laureate. Do you still have that weird second?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It doesn't matter if it's 2 people. I've gone in front of 3,000 people. Every time I step on that stage, I am super nervous. Yeah, usually, and this is probably too much information, TMI. I usually have to go to the bathroom.
Sure, yeah.
Before, what I mean? Yeah. I just get this nervous anxiety. But
after the 10,000 hours of doing it, is there there must be. Well, I guess the thing is, what you've learned is that you're gonna get nervous.
Yeah.
And you have to go to the bathroom.
And I have to manage it.
And
yeah.
you will end up still doing it,
yeah.
rather than before. That might have been a hindrance to even take the step up.
Absolutely.
Right? I guess
even
that's
getting on the stage. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's you, and you lose it right away. Like the minute you start,
right.
it's gone.
Yeah.
But then there's something else. You need to get off the stage and like, should I have done that poem? I could have done this other poem. Was that better? Do people understand that? You know, you have all these things that you, at least me personally, that I contend with. You know, even I'm just now starting to put stuff on Instagram and things like that because it was hard for me. It was just like.
It's vulnerable.
It's vulnerable.
Yeah.
But then it's like, then you're exposing yourself to thousands of people, right? So it's like a 2-minute clip is taking me 12 hours because I'm like, are the glasses right? Am I looking right? Should I wear this shirt? You just wanted to say, hey, come see me tomorrow. It becomes this whole thing. But you know, I keep every so often I keep getting these messages from the universe here and there, and one was something that I was not listening to. I came across on Instagram, and it was Childish Gambino, right? And he was in an interview, and he said he spoke to Erykah Badu about something earlier on in his career, and he was saying something. I'm paraphrasing here. He was saying something like. You know, I was telling her that I was nervous. I have this album. I don't know if people are going to like it and da-da-da and all these nerves. And she said something like, do what you want to do. It's not your responsibility how people will eat it. Yeah. Some people are going to eat it with a knife and fork. Some are just going to scarf it down. She's just like, do what you love. Yeah. It's not your thing to figure out how they're going to eat it. Yeah. And I keep getting messages like that. Every so often, that keep if I'm present enough to recognize the messages coming through, then I'm like, okay,
kind of fortifies.
It's like it's okay. Do your work, and it's going to be what it's going to be. But there's always going to be that imposter.
So, is there something that you wrote that you're really proud of, like for the younger Tshaka, that you wrote that like, man, that was a really great line. Like, I'm very proud of that.
There's a couple. It's a poem, I think. So there's a couple things, right? Yeah. One is, I wrote this poem. It's probably my third poem. I can't even find it now. Oh. But it was something it was talking about the fact that the purest poem I'll ever write was the first poem I wrote before I got on a stage. Mm. And what was meant by that is that the minute you get on a stage and you let that out, you now see audience response. You know, however you try and not bring that in, it's going to impact the next thing you write. If your view is to talk about it in front of people and blah blah blah. So that to me was pretty. You know, I didn't realize till later on. I was like, oh, that was pretty.
Insightful.
Yeah, insightful back then to be my like second, you know, like polished poem. But then there's a poem called that I was kind of known for when I was coming out called Spit. It was Spit a Little. And there's a couple of lines in there that I really like. One that talks about, you know, black folk having short-term memory, you know, in terms of, you know, things that are cyclical that we keep doing. Yeah. You know, there's one called Lactose Intolerant. I no longer listen to negative hip hop because I'm lactose intolerant. And it goes into some other things.
Kind of a cool
so, you know, so there's little pockets of things that in my first, I would say, like, you know, quote unquote, my first 3 slam poems that I had slam poems. There's a number of little nuggets that I really love from those pieces.
So in doing this, I mean, like, to be an artist, and especially dealing with the subjects that you're looking at, and how has that shaped your personality and your own understanding of your own identity in the world? How have you seen yourself grow and mature in that?
Yeah, it's a journey. It's you know, there's a couple of things there's a muscle, right? I always say that you know, you're going to try to change and such, but what you're trying to do is build the muscle such that you know who you're being earlier. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so
you can see your own trigger signs earlier.
Yeah, because we are who we are.
Yeah.
But if you understand, if you build that muscle enough to understand that quicker, then you can decide, am I going to be an asshole?
Right.
You know what I mean? You're
Yeah.
making a conscious decision.
Yeah.
But I think, overall, the sort of the journey in, I was very much, when I started, I was very much pro-black. And this, I mean, God, even in college, I remember getting my dorm room, and you could get a phone number and you could pick your own phone. And I'm trying to work it out so that I could get a phone that was representative number.
Yeah,
and I ended up with 72 black. You know what I mean?
Cool.
It was like, rah. And so it was that coming out of, coming out of college, and then in my early work, it was very much, I don't even know if the word you want to call is pro-black, but it was, it was very much sort of rah in that sense.
Yeah.
And then there was a point where I was just like, but we're all one, we're all people, we're all. And so then I started questioning some of the stuff that I was saying before, because I'm like, whether you're talking about white folks or you're talking about different folks, it's just like, we're all stemming from the same place. We're all having the same, the same concerns. And the more and more you go out and perform poetry and you see the relevance of things. I remember doing a poem once, and it was about hip hop. And a lady came to me and said, she's crying, and she's like, thank you so much. I didn't know how to say goodbye to my father, and now I do. And I'm like, this poem's about hip hop, right? She's like, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So it's moments like that you're kind of like, this is beyond you,
Yeah.
And start realizing how, like, we are a human community, So it started having me question some of the work I was doing. So that was like the second stage, which then changed sort of the work I was doing.
Changed kind of like your voice.
It was very much sort of like.
So the younger, right, is very revolutionary.
Right.
This next phase changed you to be, what would you say?
I would say it was more like, I was Tupac Chokra.
That's a good line.
It was very much like the universe, and
sure.
It was like there's a journey. It was like Paulo Coelho. It was you know what I mean? It was very much unity. Look at this from a unity perspective.
Is there a piece that comes to mind that exemplifies that transition a little bit more, or just the overall?
Yeah, I don't know. It's probably written into different things. But then that was the middle. Yeah. And then where I am sort of closer to now is somewhere in between, because I realize
totally.
There
is injustice.
There is injustice.
That needs to be
and there is identity.
Yeah, and identity.
You know what I mean? And so it's not giving myself permission, but not being afraid to have the conversation. Yeah. It is, and maybe it was part of the BLM movement and what was happening, but there is a conversation that needs to be happening about Black folk, just as well as there is about the Latinx community, just many others. Yeah. Doesn't mean that, that whole saying about like, the all lives and Black lives doesn't mean I don't think all lives don't matter. I'm just talking about this right now. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so it's switched to kind of a joining of the two now, is that, yes, it is a universal thing, but identity is important. You know, heritage is important. This is where we all come from and sort of what shapes us. And so kind of gone back to give myself permission to be like, you can still be rah-rah. Yeah, you just do it in a different set, in a different way.
It is weird, right? I mean, it's that kind of that strange balance of existence between it, there's the I and then there's the we, right? And then trying to figure out, and then there's the they, right? And then navigating your whole journey as an individual in that through that kind of experience.
Exactly. And trying to stay true to yourself. Yeah. While, acknowledging that the world is changing, you know. And how do you walk within that? So it's coming to San Jose was instrumental for that, because again, when you talk about being around Hispanic heritage as much and seeing the similarities, and seeing some of the same struggles. But again, as you get older, and if you're blessed enough to travel, you see that stuff. You see, people that either look like you going through the same things, or people that don't look like you going through the same things. The sad thing is that
human beings have done a really good job of inflicting injustice on anybody who doesn't seem like that or doesn't come from their neighborhood,
Absolutely.
right? You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Throughout time, throughout history, it's like
It's an
brother
epidemic, man. It's an epidemic.
killing brother, yeah.
You know, and then, how do you, I came up somewhat in a religious household, right? So then it's like all on top of that, then how do you wrap spirituality and religion into all of that, you know? So it's an ever evolving journey. I think that's part of why I love poetry, is because, you can sort of track that journey. And I think, I forget who said it, but they always say, and my dad says this as well, that if you want to know the true, what's happening during a certain time of period in life or in history, go to the artists. You go to the artists, you go to the poets, because there's no affiliation. You know what I mean? They're just showing you what they see versus an agenda coming from a history book or something.
They're
like
the
that.
prophets, right?
Exactly.
I mean, they're the ones that are seeing it, and for whatever, they feel the tension. And it moves them so much that they have to take action.
Right? And they're showing it in various mediums. So if you just look at it, you can piece the story together. And so it's a journey. It's an evolution. But I, again, with poetry, I'm blessed to kind of see that and track that that progression in my life.
Talk about your connection. I mean, because sound and audio, voice it's so physical, but words are so ethereal. Right. I don't even have a question.
No, I have a simple answer for your non-question. Right? Is this? It's an equation to me. Right? We're talking into a microphone. We know this is a microphone because we call it a microphone. We know this is a table because we call it a table. It's the floor because we call it a floor. We call it the floor. So if words define the world that we live in, and as poets, our job is to manipulate words, then we can manipulate the world.
Yeah, that's awesome.
You know what I mean?
I like it.
That's how I've sort of come back to this sort of equation for me of why does this matter, and why do words matter? Because words define the world. If we don't have something to call it, whatever language, whether it sounds or clicks or whatever, there's something that denotes that thing.
That's cool. I totally got like a vision of morphine of existence. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because of that.
And so, and you're a visual person, so you get it. That's how I see. That's how I see my words. Is
shaping. So you're each one of your poems, in many ways, is its own little world. Right. You're creating a scene and a feeling and an idea. And a call to action a lot of times?
A lot of times it's a call to action, or there's like the realization that you don't know what to call the action is. But I always say it's a canvas. It's a blank canvas, and I'm painting the poem. It is its own world. Even when I do workshops where I talk about I'll go to a smell or a moment and then pull that up. And pull that up into a poem. Because that's how I see poetry. And it's many levels, or you can go from up and pull it down. You know what I mean? But the just the universality of language, of words, in even like you said, in the way that you say stuff, right? Just clearly catastrophe was culminating around the coming day, so I cuddled comfort carefully around conformity and commenced to continue my slumber. Just the consonants. Right? When I'm on stage and I say something like that, people start moving back. I'm not doing anything but just saying words with consonants, right? And so just the sound and the way that words infiltrate our body, I think is powerful. And so if, as poets, our job is to use those and manipulate those, and we can change the world.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Yeah. I was thinking, then, like musicians will do stuff like, especially like in jazz music, right? Let's say they want to write a song that's just like in one chord, or they want to do something that's going to do you do that sometimes? Like you sit down and you say like, I really want to do something that's just a hard consonant, or something that's got a long vowel, or kind of play around with those type of things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's what's the fun with it. The palette. There's just in what I was doing there, it's like bringing people. God, I forget the name of the poem, but it's all sounds.
Oh, okay.
Like every word is a
cool
sound. You know, or playing around with like like I did with Clearly Catastrophe. But there's, things like maybe. Made to hear the meandering mean of my mention as meaning anger, when in fact it's more my moving mountains made to make my momentum momentary. Yeah. Like, there's still, like, there's places where I sit and I'm like, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
Then there's places like I want to be, a grandmother on a deathbed. But what does that sound like? And that's the thing. It's like, when I talk about going back to my dad and the texture of words, like how does this grandmother say this word, but it's also music, it's all like I don't want no flood coming out them brown tears, baby. You know what I mean? And it's like, how do you
phrasing?
How do you wrap that around curvature? Like, how do you create words? And so
the texture of that. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
and that's what I love about language. So so just similar to I think an artist that sits down and says, okay, I teach, when I teach some of them workshops, I'm like, what do you want people to leave with? And work backwards. How do you want them to walk out the door? Mad, angry, sad, whatever. Then walk that back into the poem. Because then that's the layer, then that can help, that can help shape, the language that you're using. And especially, like you said, it's different if it's on paper. That's a whole different sort of context.
For someone to read, versus the audio,
audio, you can do that with your voice or pauses or things like that. On paper, there's ways you can break up the page and break up the lettering. I have this one that talks about it's not about falling off of a cliff, but it is about like falling. And so the words, kind of the letters, like break off, like, so it's constantly, but the L and the Y are down here. So you can play with that same type of language on text.
So you're using the visual and the grammar and the punctuation and the space between the letters to try to communicate another idea.
That same kind of music. Like I said, I think for me there's rhythm that's built into the work, and although sometimes it's not conscious, that's what comes from it. And I always go back to this I don't remember where I read this, but it's the trumpet player.
Miles Davis?
Miles Davis. Yeah. And he talked about the fact that when he plays a G, by the time it gets to the audience, goes through the air and all of that, it's actually no longer a G. Because the sound is affected as it travels to that audience member. So Miles was just a genius. Yeah. So then how do you come up with the understanding of that and then say, so I'm going to play this other letter, this other tone, this other note, so that by the time it gets to you, it's a G. I'm like, boom. My mind was just blown. But I take all of that back to my work and I'm just like, okay, how do I, if by the time this gets to the audience's ears, are they hearing what I want to say? Or am I leaving it up to them? Is it okay?
Interpretation.
Yeah.
Would you say, so let's take Tshaka Campbell's life then as a poem.
Right.
What do you think you want that to say? What are you trying to, at the end of the days?
Yeah, it's
like maybe it's like the perfect thing that you're striving for. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What is the North Star?
Yeah.
That I guess if I answer it that, like, what I want people to walk out knowing, like, who is Tshaka? I think a sponge, like a someone who takes in the environment around him, and then tries to turn it and give it back. Not perfectly. I want people to know that, I'm imperfect, that I'm constantly growing. I'm probably more wrong than I am right, but that's okay.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and at the core, I think humans are inherently good. At the core. They just get effed up, man. You know, it's like they go through a time. I think inherently people are good people, and I want to be able to pull that and to see that in people. You know, I'm a conflicted. God, you asked a poet to answer this question. It's gonna be forever.
That's right.
You know, I'm a conflicted man as well. Like my
Yeah,
life is
totally.
full of conflicts. You know, in terms of what I believe in, when I believe in it, and how I believe in it. You know, so I think, you know, it's to folks to know I'm a flawed creature, but I'm doing my best.
Yeah. So I love that analogy of the sponge. So what is it right now as Tshaka the sponge? What's squeezing to make the make the water come out?
Yeah, it's most recently it's grappling with depression. Like most recently,
Yeah.
a lot of things that happen in my life right now. Like I'm realizing this thing called ageism. Like what in the hell?
Yeah.
I'm not old, you know. So it's like these little things that are like tweaking at me, you know. But that's like real recent. But what what's like working in my psyche is the human condition right now. But the funny thing is, it's the human condition, but how did we get here? And the conflict is, I don't know that it matters, but I know it matters. You know what I mean? It's like, I know it matters why this is called First Street. I know it matters that, you know, back in the day, there was a river here, and this is where indigenous people washed their clothes. I know it matters because I know all of that has impact.
Yeah.
But then I look at where we are from a societal perspective right now, and if I tell anyone that, they're like, "So what? It is what it is now. Now there's Nirvana on the corner. What? So you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like
how do you deal with it in this moment for the future?
Yeah. So there's all of that, trying to figure out like, how do I capture all of that? You know, there's a next project I want to work on that's kind of digging into that a little bit, and I don't know what it's going to be yet, so I can't even mention it. But it has that idea. But like soaking up everything that's going on right now, Palestine.
Yeah, I saw you had a poem.
Yeah.
Not Holy, I think it was called.
Yeah, No Holy.
Yeah, No
you
Holy,
know, and for me that was like that ripped pieces off of me because again it was like, look, and again especially, and I wrote that when I was at in your Poet Laureate stage, so it's kind of like there's the politics of the role and all of this kind of stuff, and so. You know, but the reality for me is like strip everything away. Let's just talk about the children.
Yeah, right.
Right? And the children, they don't cause any war. Like, children don't cause wars.
Yeah.
And I don't care what side you're on, what your belief system is, children are suffering.
Yeah.
So if anything, let's figure this out for kids.
You would think we would be,
Yeah.
we could curve our humanity enough to say, wait, no, you love your kids just as much as I love my kids. So.
Right. These are kids. They grew up they don't know anything about how long this land has been populated or not populated. You know what I mean? And so, like, that for me was the crux of that poem.
Yeah.
You know, it's like.
I love that. Okay. The line, evil, is not evil, the breadcrumb.
Leaving something does not like, prune, which is funny enough. Like, this is when I say sponge, right?
Yeah.
Because as I was writing pieces, like I said, these moments, right?
Yeah.
And so, my family was watching the Great American Baking Show.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Right on. Okay. That's
and
cool.
when they do bread, you have to prune the dough so it will rise properly when you break it.
When you cut it, you mean like the little
No, when you're putting the dough together and mixing the dough together.
Kneading it and stuff.
You knead it, right? But then you have to leave it. I forget what the process is, but it has to prune.
Okay.
And then you can turn it into bread or whatever the case may be. So I was hearing that in the background and then thinking about like evil and these breadcrumbs and being pruning, like growing to then hence where that line.
Yeah.
Where that like
that's kind of cool actually to see like that's kind of fun to see actually where the the idea came from, even though you were talking about this other, or thinking about this other subject.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. So it's
sponge,
like,
man, you're a sponge.
It's taking all of this, and so, you're pouring all of that, you're pouring all of that into the work, and, hoping that you're doing some good by it, and some of it is selfish because I just want to get stuff out, but,
What is it like, you talked about that kind of insight that you had about the audience. What do you feel now is, what are you grappling it to be, Tshaka, authentic to writing and expressing your experience and identity, but then what do you feel like the audience is, you're grappling, like, oh, they want me to do this, or I feel like I need to do this.
This is an age-old problem, you know what I mean? I remember, you back in the day, you come to a venue and you're like, I just wrote this poem, I'm going to do this poem. And this part is ego, right? This part is definitely ego.
Yeah,
it's like,
of course
you go and you're like, I've been writing this poem and working on this poem for 3.5 weeks. I'm going to go perform it.
Yeah.
And then someone gets on stage and does a poem that you have a poem similar to, and the crowd is going crazy.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, well, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
And then you get up and do that poem that you just worked through. You worked 3.5 weeks, and you don't do that poem because you're lulled into, and it goes back to that first piece about you're never as pure.
Yeah.
So you have to battle through that, I think, as a poet, as a performing artist. But it's really a hard conversation for me about like what the audience needs and such. And I think where I am right now is I've given it to, there's sometimes when a poem is calling you, and it really doesn't matter or who the audience is or what the audience is, because I'm going to give it to you. You're going to learn today. So it's sometimes it's those moments. But then, you, especially again, as you become a sort of professional poet and doing things, you're called to do shows. You're called to do things, And so
present a poem at this event.
Present a poem at this event, or hey, can you come do some poems? And here's the theme. And so you're kind of in this position where, it's your integrity is involved, and so if someone's asking you to come do this theme, then you need to do
you
the
want to do a
theme.
good job, and you're providing the service, and you have a talent and a skill.
Absolutely. So I think the key there, for me at least, what I do is, I call it encoding. Like, if it is something I want to say and it's a different theme, I'll find a way to encode that poem with stuff. The people that are supposed
those with
to hear
ears
it,
will hear
it and then don't. But I think you have to keep the audience in mind, but not. Oh God, how do I say this? I think you have to keep the audience in mind. Okay, perfect example. And again, pulling stuff in. Everyone's talking about Elon. It's like a Tesla, right, with autonomous driving. The Tesla is going down the street. It's not reacting to the people walking 2 blocks away, but it knows they're there. So it's keeping them in sight. So I think that's what it is with the poetry. It's like, as you're doing this thing, keep the audience in sight. Know that they're coming and they're there in the environment around you. But that's not don't let it be so much so that that's dictating the way, the direction that the Tesla's driving. And,
totally.
And
Well, I guess the thing too is because, I think we all want impact, right? And so what you're doing, and you have a message, so you do want people to be able to hear it and get it to a certain level. You don't want to just alienate everybody, but then no one's gonna be educated and transformed, and then so there's a balance between educating, entertainment, and and using things to draw people in, and then not spoon feeding them, but zapping them.
You're right, and it's a real challenge, at least in that I've experienced, because it's not too far from here. I remember doing a show, and it was during Black History Month. And there had a number of performers. And so one performer did something. It was really, I don't want to say anti, but it was hard. Sure. And then I did a poem similar to what they were saying, but it wasn't in the same kind of context. And I remember someone coming up to the audience and was just like, I heard you. I didn't hear him.
Interesting.
Or I didn't hear them, but I heard you. that within itself has a bunch of conflicts as well. Because I'm
Right.
like, on one side,
I'm like thinking, all kinds of
I'm like, I'm glad you heard me, but like,
Yeah.
is that
Well,
'cause-
that must make you even. I mean, like, I just want to. That I would think that, especially if it was like on race and stuff like that, right? There is the thing of like, well, even between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, right? The whites like Martin Luther King because he was talking peace. They don't like
Exactly.
So right, there's that tension too, right? Of like, okay, I didn't hear that, but I hear you. And then it's like, well, wait a minute, am I just?
Did I just whitewash what I just
Right,
did?
right,
I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Thank you, but no.
Right, exactly. That's got to be hard too.
Yeah, no, it's, you know, and that's the thing. It's like the things that you have to grapple with. And then on the other side of that, you know, you potentially have that artist saying,
right,
you're just, you know.
Right, so then you're like, oh, yeah, you're just placating to them. Yeah,
Right. But
yeah.
this is the way I work with this in my head is I get that. First of all, you don't know what I do. So don't talk to me about what, you know, where I've been and what I've done.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's that part of it. But then there's also I also understand that I'm going to get into rooms that you won't get into.
Yeah.
And so if that means that I am curating the language in such a way that lets me get into that room, then I think that's partly worth it because, you know, I used to grapple with it. I get up on stage and it's like, oh, angry black man poem. You know what I mean? And so you have to kind of work through that before people even hear what you have to say. But I have a poem called, oh goodness, it's corporate something or another. But it talks about me being in a room trying to get funding for a...
I think you did that at one of the SV Chris
Yeah, I
things.
did.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, corporate something. I forget what it's called. But it was like...
Yeah, it was really good.
Being in that room and being in front of people and asking them for money for this scholarship. And at the same time, like it tearing me apart that I'm asking for this money and someone not even paying attention to the conversation, you know. But at the end of it, I get to the point of like, you know, I got to be where there's a greater good for this. And so that's how I have to, you know, sort of work with it, is getting in front of folks that typically would not get this message, wouldn't be in a room.
Yeah. It always is as doing any kind of art and expression, right, there's a weird kind of dance. And that's the thing, is like, how do you be true to yourself?
Yeah.
And there's moments you can have. That's the great thing of any kind of art form, right? You can have one poem that's just a slap in the face and the other one that's a pat on the back.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's the beauty of having a body of work, right?
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, if you've got a catalog, you can do that. I remember going to Stanford once and doing a show. This is right in the middle of everything going on, you know, and I had a poem that talked about, like, you know, things that were happening in 2020.
Yeah.
And I remember, like, oh, I was going to do this poem. And then I get up on stage, like half the room I felt filled with police officers. I was like, oh, so I may have to adjust this just a tiny bit, you know. But these moments, I mean, there's other times I'll be in that room and I'm just going to be like, okay, I'm going to do what I'm, but, you know, it's I think about being true to yourself in the moment. And I know me, I'm going to grapple and bang myself on the head regardless of what I do. Regardless of what I
should have
do.
did that. I should.
Yeah, exactly.
Which
So-
is kind of good, right? I mean, that is good. Like to have that means there's enough self-dialogue going in. We have to think like, did I do a good job of that? Should I have done that? And sometimes there is like a still small voice that says, no, this isn't the time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then there's the other time that says, no, this is the time.
Yeah.
Right. And
that's
how do
exactly
you?
it.
And that's what you were talking, I think, with age, right? You start to get. I might have to go to the bathroom before, but I'm still going to get up on stage.
Yeah. No, that's exactly it. And you hit the nail on the head. Younger Tshaka, 20-something-year-old Tshaka would have went in that room and just blew them to pieces.
Yeah.
And wouldn't have cared, right? Older Tshaka is more like, but would they hear you? Right? Would they have heard anything you actually said?
Yeah.
Would you have engendered that? Would you have started some dialogue? And that's the difference, you know. I think.
Or you just kind of like reinforce
the stereotypes.
Absolutely.
And stuff.
That's like, that's so hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the thing is like, I feel like that's the great thing, though, that in the breadth of the community, all those things give the opportunity for better dialogue and discussion, right?
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes people don't. The angry poem is valid.
Yeah.
There's an experience
Yeah.
there that's hecka real.
Absolutely.
And so if you can't hear that, and then you hear maybe something else that you can hear a little bit more, at least then you can get to like, can you walk in that person's shoes for? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a space for it, and that's the thing. Is like, again, keep coming back to myself and say there was a reason why there's a space for a Malcolm X and a Martin Luther King,
Yeah, totally.
and a Booker T. Washington. There were places, and folks played the roles. You know what I mean? They so.
They're being true to themselves.
Yeah. You have to understand that, like, everyone's not at the same place.
Yeah. Totally.
So if ultimately we have the same North Star you're gonna talk. You're gonna, you have to do it differently. You're not gonna get on stage and, if I'm speaking Spanish, and I've Puerto Ricans in the audience and Dominicans, but I also have El Salvadorians. I have There's nuances.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you have to be able to recognize that there are nuances there. And so maybe you're not the person to speak in this particular space. You know what I mean?
I did want to ask you about the Poet Laureate experience and all that kind of stuff, but for the sake of time, it's been a great conversation. Yeah. I kind of want to go just to more of what advice would you give to other creatives out there that are looking to kind of like grow and build and in this space of creativity with poetry and words?
I think you just have to write. That's one thing. I don't believe in writer's block. I believe you're trying to write something. Stop trying.
Oh yeah.
You're trying to write a poem. Stop trying to write the poem. Just write something. We can carve the poem out of it later.
Yeah.
Just write. And so you have to write. You have to put content out there. I remember, oh God, what's his name? That heads up Louis Vuitton now. He was part of Nerds.
I don't know.
Rapper. Oh my God.
Pharrell.
Thank you. Pharrell.
He's head of Louis Vuitton?
Designer, designer for head designer for Louis.
Oh.
Yeah. So he said, I saw something the other day, and he said someone was talking to him, and he said, just create. Like, even if you have to give it away, because we have the tendency to be like, oh, I've created this thing. It's mine. It's my patent, and I'm going to dictate how I put it in the world. He was like, no, give it away. You'll have more.
Yeah.
But you have to, as part of being an artist and a creative is being able to put your creativity, your thing out in the world.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's just free. That's just putting it out there. Yeah. So I think that's very important for a creative, right? Do what you need to do, put it out there. Yeah. Go to different places. Don't get caught up in, oh, I'm great.
Right.
I'm
not
fabulous.
Gonna do that. Yeah.
Right. I'm fabulous, but you've been to like 2 coffee shops, and they're all in 10-block radius of your house,
Yeah.
Go out there and see what people are doing. A lot of artists say, poets have to read, and I agree with that. But reading includes, to me, comic books, the back of an ingredients label, like
the word, just looking
just
at words,
just seep
and
that
the use of words in different contexts.
Absolutely.
Right?
I mean, you can turn around and write a poem about, I don't know, love, but write it in the sense of like an ingredients on the back of a Coke bottle. You know what I mean? So it's experience the world, walk and look.
Yeah.
And look and just look. I say walk now. I don't walk that much. I'm always in my car, but at least look.
Observe. Yeah.
Observe.
Yeah.
Take in. The water is not half. The glass is not half full or half empty. It's on the side, and stuff is spilling out. Like that's how I feel like if you look at things in that context, it'll naturally sort of shake things up. People are like, Tshaka, how do you write so passionately about your work? And I'm like, I write about things I'm passionate about. It's pretty simple. You know what I mean? There's no other.
Yeah.
So
but you have to
there.
think on it and meditate on it to become.
Yeah.
You have to be active in order to get passionate.
Yeah. But that could be anything. That could be like, I wrote a letter about a fruit fly. Right, about talk about resilience. This dumb thing. This fruit fly was flying into the light, got burnt, came back down, flew right back into the light, and then continued. And I'm like, you want to talk about resilience and determination?
Yeah.
And that was just looking at this fruit fly. So I think just the world is we're all connected. Everything from a like you said, on a vibration level, on a DNA level, on a molecule level.
Yeah.
Like everything is so connected. And if we just take the time to just listen, I love Neil deGrasse. You just love listening to him because it helps put scientific context to how I'm feeling. But we're all connected and everything's connected. So if you take time to look, trust me, you'll find a way to connect that to something that you want to write or something you're experiencing that you'll then turn into words on a page.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you,
Oh,
Tshaka,
thank you, man. This has been
for observing and then sharing what you've been seeing. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate this platform, man, and being here. So I appreciate you and all that you do. For all of y'all, do y'all know what this man does? No,
we're talking about Tshaka.
Okay. And part of Tshaka is to give people flowers.
Well,
and you need to get your flowers.
I'll take the flowers. Thank you.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks for being
so much.
here.
Indeed, man. Indeed.
Thank you for listening to the Content Magazine podcast. Follow us on social media at Content Mag. Become a member and help us to continue to tell the stories of the South Bay creatives. This episode's music is 408 by Jack Pavlina. Follow him on Spotify and also on his Instagram at Jack Pavlina Music.